Don't forget Raymond Smith, who died at the defendant's hands.
He stated that this individual was the first one that he took photos of. We showed him a photo album which contained 15 photos of a black male in various positions, and he identified this individual as a person he met at the 219 Club area and offered him the same line as to come to be photographed, to have a drink and look at dirty videos.
The 15 photos that you're talking about, were they photos of a live or dead person?
They were photos of a dead person.
In various poses?
Yes.
Go ahead.
He indicated that this victim agreed, and he took him to 924 North 25th Street, apartment 213, where he drugged him, subsequently killed him by strangulation, and after removing his clothes, he saw the tattoo of Cash D, the initial D, on his chest and pitchforks going up in the name of Cash.
He ran into Cash D, who he thought was a black male prostitute, and offered him money to go home with him. While at his home, Cash D said he wanted more money. Jeffrey gave him a drink, laid with him, and then once he was asleep, strangled him. He recalled that prior to killing Cash D, he had brought another man back to the apartment and made him a drink, as he usually did in a coffee cup. The man drank the wrong cup, and consequently, Jeffrey drank the drink with the sleeping pills. He fell asleep, and the man robbed him of $300. Jeffrey did not report this incident to the police. He reported he would have strangled this victim, but the man had taken the cup without the sleeping pills. After Cash D, Jeffrey met...
This next one is a juvenile, so you can use initials.
I will.
Thanks.
After Cash D, Jeffrey met a young man with the initials LP, who was waiting tables. He was Hispanic, and Jeffrey believed him to be around 16 years old. He propositioned him, and the man agreed to go to his apartment. They kissed, masturbated, and watched videos. Jeffrey did not have any pills available to him that weekend. He went to an Army surplus store and bought a mallet. He took pictures and had him lay on his stomach. He struck him on the back of the neck with the mallet. The guy got up and attempted to leave the apartment and said he would call the police. This male left and then came back in and asked Jeffrey for money for a cab. Jeffrey tried to strangle him at this point, but then calmed down, and they both went into the bedroom. Jeffrey called him a cab, and he went home. Jeffrey said that this young male did call the police, but the police never followed up on the call.
Don't forget Edward Smith, who died at the defendant's hands.
He states that he had oral sex with this individual and then killed him by the same procedure, drugging him until he slept, strangling him, and dismembering him.
Jeffrey stated that he went to Sears and bought a 5-square-foot floor freezer with locking top to store the defleshed bones. He also purchased 2 30-gallon plastic trash bags to put the defleshed remains in. He poured muriatic acid to acidify the flesh and then flushed the remains down the toilet.
Yes, after the complaint about the smell, and somebody actually identified his apartment as the source of the smell. So I had called and talked to him in the office and went with him to his apartment.
And what excuse did he give at that time?
He said his deep freezer broke and he had meat in it that's getting spoiled. I thought he was a nice guy at the time.
No further questions. Don't forget Ernest Miller, who was stabbed to death by the defendant because he was becoming conscious. The defendant had to get a drink to do it. Don't forget Ernest Smith.
He had only a few pills available. While the victim was asleep, he thought, quote, "How should I keep him," end quote. He did not want to put this person through any pain, and consequently he stabbed him in the jugular. He painted the skull with granite spray paint. He tried tasting the flesh and the heart. He bought a tenderizer, tenderized the heart, and ate it and the muscle meat. He reported that it had a beef-like flavor. It gave him a sexual thrill while eating it. He felt that the man was a part of him and he had internalized him.
Don't forget David Thomas, strangled by the defendant.
Mr. Dahmer told the police that once he had David Thomas back to his apartment, he thought that David Thomas wasn't really his type, and he killed him because he'd already given him the sleeping potion and thought that Thomas would wake up and be angry.
Don't forget Curtis Straughter, strangled to death by the defendant.
Quote, he was gay and he wanted anal sex, so I made the drink mixture. He fell asleep, used the handcuffs. This was the first time I used handcuffs. Strangled him, took pictures.
Don't forget Earl Lindsay, first drilled and eventually killed by the defendant.
This is the first of the instances in which he drilled a hole into his victim's skull. And here Mr. Dahmer reported that he first drugged Mr. Lindsay and thereafter used what he described as the drilling technique on the top of his skull. And we discussed this in some detail. In the course of that discussion, he said that after initially having drilled the hole and injected I would call it a syringe, it's a baster actually, a syringe full of muriatic acid into the cranial cavity of Mr. Lindsay, that Mr. Lindsay woke up, and when he regained consciousness, Mr. Dahmer said he was groggy when he woke up, but still coherent and aware of his surroundings, and so I figured it was a failure. Gave him more sleeping pills, he fell asleep, then I strangled him. Because what Mr. Dahmer wanted here was the compliant sex partner, the zombie as he described it, rather than to have a corpse. It was his intention to keep this man alive if that was going to work. But when he concluded that he had failed to achieve the compliant partner with no will, only then did he strangle him. So what's another way to look at it is that when he couldn't have the zombie-like creation he was hoping for, he was willing to settle for a corpse. I asked him in that discussion the question, you didn't expect him to wake up and say, yes, master? And he said, no, no, but that was the general idea. Later in that same conversation, he said, quote, I was just trying to disable the will. And I asked, and subject them to your will? And he said, right.
Don't forget Tony Anthony Hughes, first drilled, then extinguished by the defendant.
Mr. Dahmer didn't try to kill Tony Hughes, but rather Mr. Hughes died through the foreseeable but unintended consequence of this drilling technique. He drilled a hole into his skull and poured in acid, and Mr. Hughes died then, even though it was Mr. Dahmer's intention to keep him alive in this altered state. And so there's no compulsion here to kill. He'd rather he'd not have died. And it was not any impulsive act of killing, but rather a planful act of trying to provide himself with a compliant sexual partner.
Don't forget Conorak Synthesymphone, age, as I recollect, age 14, for a couple of days of sexual pleasure.
He stated that he met him while he was walking around the Grand Avenue Mall. He indicated that after introducing himself to the victim, he offered him $50 to accompany him back to his apartment to pose, have some drinks, and watch videos. He feels it was about 5 p.m. when they got there, and once inside the apartment, the victim disrobed down to his black bikini panties, and he posed for several photographs. During the time he walked him into the bedroom area and sat him on the bed, Mr. Dahmer states that the victim, Tony Hughes, whom he had killed several days earlier, was lying naked on the bedroom floor. He stated that the Asian boy, he believes he saw him, but he did not react to it. He feels this was because of the rum and coffee and sleeping pill mixture. After he realized he was unable to arouse the victim by mouth-to-penis sex and by body rubbing and kissing him, he continued to watch the video and drink beer until he himself fell asleep. After a few hours, he woke up. It was quite late out, approximately 11 or 12 p.m., at 11 p.m. to 12 a.m., or maybe a little later. He realized the victim was still sleeping because of the effects of the drink he gave him, so he decided to go to the tavern located on 27th, just north of Kilburn, the Care Bear Bar. He continued drinking there, and at closing time, excuse me, after leaving the tavern, he began walking eastbound on West State Street. He observed the victim, the Asian boy, sitting completely naked on the southeast corner of 25th and State. The victim was sitting on the curb. He stated there were two black females standing by him, and they appeared to be hysterical. He walked up to the victim, whom he realized was speaking to the black females in Asian. The victim was disoriented and appeared to be intoxicated by alcohol. However, Mr. Dahmer realized that he must still be under the influence of the drink containing the sleeping pills that he had given him. This time he advised the ladies that the victim was in fact a friend of his. He attempted to pull the victim in the direction of the apartment. He stated that the women continued screaming at him, we don't know if you really know this guy, and we called the police. Why don't you wait until the police get here?